about your book is that it's dense in a better way. It's dense with stories, the real stories of human beings. They're not made up. Like you said, they're not actors. These are real people. I think that's why all of us as readers can enter the book so easily, because it helps us connect with the losses in our own life. And it's there that we discover our own therapeutic journey, our own theology, our own spiritual life. That's what makes it real. So thank you. Thank you for what you did. To me, that's what true education is. I'd like to begin with a quote from Pulitzer Prize-winning poet Mary Oliver, a wonderfully wise woman who, through the loss in her own life, has written some amazing insights through her poetry. This one is just the very tail end of In Blackwater Woods, where she says, "To live in this world, you must be able to do three things. To love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing that your own life depends on it. And when the time comes to let it go, let it go." I'm done. That's all I need to say. She summarizes the Christian faith, and I've been asked to speak about theological, spiritual aspects. And so if you get that, you can leave early. So let me unpack a little bit more about what she's saying. Healthy religion, at its best, is meant to tell us what to do with our pain, to show us, to accompany us, to guide us, to encourage us. That's the real purpose of religion. Sometimes we get sidetracked, but for us as Christian believers, this is why the central logo of Christianity is the naked, bleeding, crucified body of a human being. That it's put there front and center, so that we can't ignore it. Some people put it around their necks and want to make jewelry out of it, but that's not its purpose. Its purpose is meant to be a central icon. To look at it and recognize, that's me. Every time life doesn't go the way you want or plan, where somebody walks out of your life, where a part of you is no longer the same, it's all about releasing and giving oneself into the mystery, inserting ourselves in the mystery that we've got to hold whatever is meaningful close to our body, knowing it's going to be ripped apart from us. Everything. Everything. So, the cross for us as Christians is what we must do with our pain. That we, as one priest, Richard Rohr, said, if you do not transform your pain, you will transmit it. That the real work of the Christian believer is meant to transform one's pain. And Jesus and Mary show us how to do that. That whatever comes our way, we are to filter it out and give back something different. This is what Pope Francis means when he says, give mercy. Be compassionate. So the cross is the emblem of transformation. I find it fascinating that Jesus said, blessed are those who weep. Blessed are those who weep. Would you say something like that? Boy, I'm sure glad you're crying. No, but there's a deep wisdom there. The wisdom is this. There is something you can only know by crying, by weeping. That it puts you in communion with all of creation. That nothing lasts forever. That everything's evolving, everything's changing. That all you have is this moment. The weeping mode is the opposite of the fixing mode, the controlling mode, the understanding mode. This is where we're invited to enter deeply, contemplatively into what is, knowing that you're going to hold on to it, but you have to let go of it as well. Just like the breath. We take in the breath, you got to let it go. Receive the next bit. This is why we're invited to not leave the place of pain too soon. Because to leave the place of pain and suffering too soon is to lose the mystery, may I say gift, wisdom, of what the loss is meant to teach us. St. Thomas More once said, God suffuses our suffering with God's own divine presence. To go through the stages of grief, of mourning, of loss, is to help us to discover new reserves of life, energy, and commitment. Is it possible, in the Creator's divine wisdom, that chaos is the universe's answer to routine? As you look to the scriptures, Walter Brueggemann says that when you read them clearly, there's a threefold pattern. That we are securely oriented, and then we become painfully disoriented, and then surprisingly reoriented. We say it this way about the Christ, is that behind every loss, behind every death, is always new life. Always new life, but it's never the same. It's not a remodeled form of life, and that's why the resurrected body of Christ still has the wounds. Is that you will always carry that pain of loss with you. And that's why it's so silly, even if you lose an animal, you say, oh, just go and get another dog. You're going to slap the person, like, what's the matter with you? Oh, you're not a pet owner, you wouldn't understand. As a human being, every human being should understand loss. It's not about having another child, having another dog, getting another job. The loss is the loss. Something new will come, but it won't come until the process, like Job going through the ashes and discovering something new there and different. The wound is the way to the sacred. That's why salvation comes through the cross. Not in spite of it. It comes to us because of it. And then behind the cross is the empty tomb. You can't do it in reverse. So grief is not something you choose to do. Do you know anybody that signs up in the school of grief? You know, I like that. I think I'm going to sign up. I want to learn a lot. Nobody signs up for grief. We all do everything we can to avoid it. But grief is something that's done to us. It's the necessary wounding of being human, being a creature. We're moving from action to the passion mode. Now, we Christians speak of being saved by the passion of Christ. And so often we can hear very glib people singing songs about that. But what that means in reality, the real human down-to-earth stuff is this. From the Latin verb patior, which means to suffer reality, to suffer the incompleteness of me, of us, of life, of creation. To let this truth work on us instead of us working on it. It's not about controlling grief. My sister was saying, it's about letting it have its time. If you want to stay in your bathroom for three months, great. That's what you need to do. To recognize that the metaphor that we use, that Jesus used for this work, is being in the belly of the whale, like Jonah, in that stinky mess. And just like Christ, we can't ascend until we descend first. We go through the hellish experience of loss before we can some other rise and eventually, not right away, eventually find meaning in our suffering. To recognize that grief is a stripping process. And this is why for us as Catholics, we honor the Station of the Cross, because in effect, it is the stages of dying. Being stripped, broken, being put to death, and then being dragged to new life. So authentic religion is not about having us escape pain or suffering. And I must admit, in my former life as a parish priest, I used to work at St. Joseph's here in Hawthorne, and oh my gosh, there's over 7,000 families there. We averaged 4 funerals a week. So I got lots of practice in doing homilies for funerals. But dealing with the grieving families taught me lots of wonderful things. The thing that disturbed me is how many people wanted to quickly escape the necessary pain of loss. How long will it take, Father, before I'll be done with the grief? As if I could say, well, according to my calculation, it would be about 45 days. Or 2.1 years. It doesn't work that way. Because what authentic religion, good religion does, is it brings us through the pain, not away from it. reminds us that even though we experience deep loneliness, is that the community of faith is there with us. Ideally, to help us to be alone in our grief. One of the most beautiful and powerful stories I heard was a pastor who was grieving, turned out to be the dying process of his wife. He was in intensive care unit. And over a period of time, different parishioners would come and visit him and his wife. And he said the one person that he remembers and that he's most grateful for was a man they didn't know very well in his congregation. He just walked into the ICU, stood behind him at a distance for about 15 minutes, didn't say a word. And then came forward and put his hand on his pastor's shoulder and just said, "I'm so sorry. I'm so very sorry." And then walked out. He said, "You know why that meant the most to me? Because so many other people wanted to try and take my pain away from me, make it all better. So they'd quote me scripture, they would do this, they'd say this. I could tell they just weren't comfortable with my pain. They didn't know what to do with me or my wife, because after all, we were the church leaders. And so they filled the space with words, religious words. That's not what I needed. I need somebody to just be with me, and this man did that. So pain, suffering, loss is meant to be confronted and transformed. That's what good religion teaches us. The fruits of grief, when it's done well, and I think this is why Jesus said, "Blessed are those who mourn." The fruits of grief are softness and illumination. Softness and illumination. It's a freedom from stagnation. I remember January 7th, 1999, I had gotten the word from my mother that my youngest brother, David, had a skiing accident down the mountain that left him paralyzed. And because of my busy schedule, I had to fly back after just basically being with him for a few hours. So I preached 2 days later on Sunday. I started the homily off, the Feast of the Baptism of the Lord, by saying, "There's nowhere I'd rather be in the face of this earth than with all of you." And then I paused. And then in one line, I gave him a newspaper account. My youngest brother is in a hospital up in Lake Tahoe, paralyzed. And I talked about grief and pain and suffering. At 27 years of age, a single man, his life would be totally changed. But what happened for me is I processed out after the liturgy. The first man to greet me, a big, tall guy, walked up. I could tell just by looking at his face that he had tasted pain in a different way. He reached out his hand, he said, "I'm really sorry about your younger brother. Hopefully he gets a little bit better." He says, "My son won't be coming home. He was killed in a car accident at 25. And he walked away. 2 or 3 people did that, and I thought, what a gift. Because what it did is it illuminated me. So often, as you know, pain and suffering just shrink our world. We think it's just me. It's part of the loneliness. But what that homily did for me, and what I found out later what it did for the community, is we were joined together in a deeper way. That someone, just happened to be me, started talking about the real things of life, the nitty-gritty things. What does that mean? The fruits of grief are meant to be for us the gift we give the community. I didn't know how to be able really to be present to people in wheelchairs, and to my brother who's in a wheelchair. I didn't know really how to be present to the grief of losing parents until my parents died 3 weeks from each other. All that changes when you're touched by grief. When we do the process well, all of a sudden, the cross makes sense as Christians. And we don't need to be afraid of it. And yes, we can do what Mary Oliver's talking about. We can hold it close, knowing I'm going to have to let go of this. Someday I can let go of the grief, because even that I can be attached to. This becomes my identity. Think of the man in the Gospel of John, who for 38 years is paralyzed. And what really wakes me up to this is the fact that Jesus walks up to him. It's the only story in the gospel. Read it yourself. Where he actually says, do you want to be healed? When you, at one level you think, is that a joke? Poor man's paralyzed. Of course he wants to be healed. But notice he responds with excuses. He's more interested in people's sympathy about his grief, his loss, his state in life. He doesn't want to be healed. Legend has it that he was one of the men who testified against Jesus at this trial. Because Jesus said, pick up your mat, get out of here. He was healed. Sometimes we can become so attached to our grief, our loss, that we don't want to rise. Because we've learned to get a lot of attention from people. Therapists, for example, clergy persons, educators, family members, neighbors, people at work, like we've never gotten before. And so, like Jesus, we are to remain faithful to the process of life, which includes suffering and death. That it's a continual process. Life, suffering, death, new life, suffering, death, new life, over and over again. So yes, your grief, our grief, the grief